All right, let's get underway. Open your Bibles to 1 Samuel. 1 Samuel. Anybody have any questions about our proposed trip for February? You're getting the help you need if you're wanting to go with us. I know Lisa was out. She's been out about 10 days. She has to have vacation time too. And the World Travel has been trying to cover for her. She will be back in the office, my understanding, tomorrow morning. So if there's any special problem you have, I'm sure Lisa can help you work through that. Someone called this week and asked about walking. Is there a fair amount of walking? And sorry, yes, of course. These old ruins, you can just get, a motor coach so close, and then you have to walk. I'm hoping that the temperature in February will be much more conducive to walking. You don't have to run or anything, but walking, yes, I'm sorry. There's just no way to see it without walking. I would say, you could always stay with the bus if there's something that you can't walk far enough, but just everywhere you go, you're going to have to walk. So you want really good, comfortable shoes. Again, we don't have to run, and we won't leave anybody behind, but you definitely have to walk. You can't get motor coaches into the old city and so on. All right, let's pray before we get underway. God, this book of yours is huge in many ways. Hundreds of pages, 66 books. We need your help. We need the help of competent scholars so that we may understand those things that are forever true about you and about us and apply what we've learned to the faithful living of our lives. We offer our best effort, we promise, in Christ's name. Amen. Okay, we're at chapter 18. Now, you'll recall, if you were here last week, and if not, then let me bring you up to date very quickly. Here we have, scholars believe, two of these ancient oral traditions coming together. You recall when we dealt with the Torah that I told you there are 4 different writings included in the Torah. We have large segments that we call J, comes from the German, which is pronounced like a Y. So Yahweh, the Yahvist, it's called. We have large segments called E, from the word Elohim, and so this writing is called the Elohist. Then we have the priestly sources, and we mean by that the priest in Jerusalem after there was a temple in Solomon's time, after there was a school and more of the priests could read and write, that they then added to the materials that came to them. Then we have a Deuteronomist, and the Deuteronomist was particularly responsible, of course, for one of the 5 scrolls in the Torah, Deuteronomy. But the Deuteronomist influence is also seen in any number of places in the Hebrew Scriptures, and editing that the Deuteronomist did at the time when they really felt the 2 southern tribes might fall, and they did, of course, to Babylon in 587, 586, but might be absorbed into another dominating country as the 10 northern tribes were by the Assyrians. So we have these oral traditions, these stories told around campfires for hundreds of years and then put together once priests could read and write. So here we've had a story of Samuel going to Bethlehem, asking Jesse if he could take a look at all of his sons, and only when the 8th one, young David, was brought in from looking after sheep and goats, did God say to Samuel in his deepest heart, "This is the one, anoint him," and he did. And then David became the strummer of the lyre. When Saul would have his horrible headaches, David would play this beautiful soothing music and Saul would get better. And then we had a story last week where it's as if they had never seen each other before, when David suddenly appears at the time when Goliath and the Philistines are camped on one hill and the Israelites on another, and neither is willing to go down into the wadi, the dry ravine, gulch, arroyo, whatever word you want to choose, because all the weapons were poorer at the bottom of the hill than at the top. So finally Goliath and David meet at the bottom, and David wins. And Saul, wow, what an outstanding young man, as if he's never seen him before. So here you have these two ancient traditions coming together. And we ended up at chapter 17 with Saul saying to him, "Whose son are you, young man?" And David answered, "I'm the son of your servant Jesse, the Bethlehemite." And we remember, of course, that Bethlehem is where Jacob's favorite wife was buried when she was giving birth to Benjamin and died in giving childbirth, and was buried at this little nowhere place called Bethlehem, the house of bread. For many, many years, it was 5 miles from Jerusalem. But, of course, today, Jerusalem has continued to grow and grow. It still is a West Bank Palestinian territory. And so this big wall you've read about, may have seen, goes right around Bethlehem. And the Israelis have control on one side of the wall, and then, of course, the Palestinians are in control on the other. So to see Bethlehem, you have to get off the coach and go through a checkpoint and get on another coach. The Palestinians then take you on into Bethlehem. But they don't want to hurt you. You are tourist dollars for them, and they'll be sure after you see the birthplace of Jesus to take you to a shop just in case you wanted to buy something before they let you get back into Israel. Anyway, Bethlehem was a little nowhere sort of place, but Rachel was buried there. So when they finally get back there 400 years later, the tribe of Benjamin wants that place to live where their great-great-great-great-great-grandmother had been buried. So that's why he's still called the Bethlehemite. He's a descendant of one of Jacob's 2 favored sons, not Joseph, but Benjamin. All right, chapter 18. When David had finished speaking to Saul, of course Saul is the king, the soul of Jonathan was bound to the soul of David. Now Jonathan, of course, is one of Saul's sons. We've already been told their names, and Jonathan is one of those. So this is a strange sort of story here of how much Jonathan and David loved each other. Saul took him that day and would not let him return to his father's house. Then Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as his own soul. Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that he was wearing, gave it to David, and his armor, even his sword, his bow, and his belt. So David went out and was successful wherever Saul sent him as a result. I mean, he had the very latest and best right from the king's own son. Saul set him over the army and all the people, even the servants, I mean, those closest to the household of Saul, approved. Everybody liked David. Remember, he's tall and good looking. As they were coming home, when David returned from killing the Philistine, that's Goliath, the women came out of all the towns of Israel singing and dancing to meet King Saul with tambourines, with songs of joy, and with musical instruments. And the women sang to one another as they made merry. And what they're singing is not going to win friends and influence people. Not with the king anyway. Saul has killed his thousands, and David his 10,000s. So right away, how would Saul feel? Well, the writer tells you Saul was very angry, for this saying displeased him. He said, "They've ascribed to David 10,000s, and to me they've ascribed thousands. What more can he have but the kingdom?" I mean, he's going to take over, if that's what people feel. So Saul eyed David from that day on. He kept his eye on him. The next day an evil spirit from God rushed upon Saul, and he raved within his house while David was playing the lyre, as he did day by day. Saul had his spear in his hand, and Saul threw the spear, for he thought, "I will pin David to the wall." When he says pin him to the wall, he means run that spear through him. But David eluded him twice. Saul was afraid of David, because the Lord was with him, with David, but had departed from Saul. God's given up on Saul. Samuel's given up on Saul. Skip to verse 14. David had success in all his undertakings, for Yahweh was with him. When Saul saw that he had great success, he stood in awe of him. Couldn't believe what this young man was able of accomplishing. But all Israel and Judah loved David, for it was he who marched out and came in leading them. Verse 17. Saul said to David, "Here is my elder daughter, Merab. I will give her to you as a wife. Only be valiant for me and fight Yahweh's battles." Now, those of you who are history majors, as I was, remember how many times royal families tried to gain control of other territories by the way they marry off their kids. Royals marry royals, as a rule. And they tried to consolidate the throne of England and the throne of Germany, the throne of England and the throne of Spain, or whatever. We will discover later that King Solomon, of course, decides that one of the ways he can maintain peace in his territory is to marry the daughters of as many surrounding chieftains as possible. Figuring that if the daughter of these chiefs' daughters live in the palace, and if they now have grandchildren living in the palace, they'll not be so inclined to war against Solomon. So he just married one woman after the other. Here Saul is feeling really jealous of David, frightened of him, so why not give him one of his daughters in marriage? For Saul thought, "I will not raise a hand against him. Let the Philistines deal with him." All right, he's thrown a spear at him twice. David's eluded that. Okay, I'm not going to kill him. I'll keep sending him into battle, and sooner or later the Philistines will get him. So David said to Saul, "Who am I? And who are my kinsfolk, my father's family in Israel, that I should be son-in-law to the king?" I mean, David is not far from a goat patch. Not far from a goat patch. There's no indication Jesse was a man of any wealth or power. I should move in as the king's son-in-law. But at the time when Saul's daughter Merab should have been given to David, she was given to Adriel as a wife. So Saul, you see, is hateful. Hateful. "I'll give you my daughter." "Well, no, I've already given her now to somebody else." Saul has another daughter, and her name is Michal. Now, Saul's daughter Michal loved David. Saul was told, and the thing pleased him. So Saul thought, "Let me give her to him, that she may be a snare for him, and that the hand of the Philistines may be against him." I mean, he's not concerned about the daughter's happiness, of course. Just another attempt to get rid of David. Therefore Saul said to David a second time, "You shall now be my son-in-law." Saul commanded his servants, "Speak to David in private and say, 'See, the king is delighted with you, and all his servants love you. Become the king's son-in-law.'" So Saul's servants reported these words to David in private, and David said, "Does it seem to you a little thing to become the king's son-in-law? This is not small to me, seeing that I'm a poor man and of no repute." The servants of Saul told him, "This is what David said." Go back and report to him that David doesn't feel worthy. Saul said, "Thus shall you say to David, the king desires no marriage present except 100 foreskins of the Philistines, that he may be avenged on the king's enemies." Oh, gee. Now there's a hook in this offer of marriage to his daughter. "I want you to go out and circumcise 100 Philistine warriors. And then you and I'll be even, Stephen." Now Saul planned to make David fall by the hand of the Philistines. I mean, surely that many can kill him. When his servants told David these words, David was well pleased to be the king's son-in-law. Before the time had expired, David rose and went along with his men and killed 100 of the Philistines. And David brought their foreskins, which were given in full number to the king, that he might become the king's son-in-law. So Saul gave him his daughter Michal as a wife. But when Saul realized that Yahweh was with David, and that Saul's daughter Michal loved him, I mean, that wasn't the point. She was just a pawn in all this. Saul was still more afraid of David. So Saul was David's enemy from that time forward. Then the commanders of the Philistines came out to battle, and as often as they came out, David had more success than all the servants of Saul, so that his fame became very great. Chapter 19. Saul spoke with his son Jonathan and with all his servants about killing David. Saul doesn't seem to have a clue how devoted Jonathan is to David. But Saul's son Jonathan took great delight in David. Jonathan told David, "My father Saul is trying to kill you. Therefore be on guard tomorrow morning. Stay in a secret place and hide yourself. I will go out and stand beside my father in the field where you are, and I will speak to my father about you. If I learn anything, I will tell you." So Jonathan spoke well of David to his father Saul, saying to him, "The king should not sin against his servant David, because he's not sinned against you, and because his deeds have been of good service to you." I mean, this killing all these Philistines he's doing has got to be in your favor. For he took his life in his hand when he attacked the Philistine, and here it's singular, so that means Goliath. And Yahweh brought about a great victory for all Israel. You saw it and rejoiced. Why then will you sin against an innocent person by killing David without cause? Saul heeded the voice of Jonathan. Saul swore. And as the Lord lives, he said, he shall not be put to death. So Jonathan called David and related all these things to him. Jonathan then brought David to Saul, and he was in his presence as before. Saul seems to be forgiven. Verse 8. You and I know this cannot last. Again there was war, and David went out to fight the Philistines. He launched a heavy attack on them so that they fled before him. Guess what happens? An evil spirit from Yahweh came upon Saul as he sat in his house with his spear in his hand while David was playing music again. So Saul sought to pin David to the wall with the spear again, but he eluded Saul so that he struck the spear into the wall, but David fled and escaped that night. Saul sent messengers to David's house to keep watch over him, planning to kill him in the morning. David's wife Michal told him, "If you do not save your life tonight, tomorrow you will be killed." So Michal let David down through the window. He fled away and escaped. Michal took an idol and laid it on the bed. Now notice here, even though we have Torah, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, He is one. You will have no other God but Him." Guess what? Israel had other gods. I've told you that. Every archaeological dig that they have conducted in Israel shows here are representations of pagan gods buried, swept over by the sands until the Babylonian captivity in 587, 586. That was a real sobering event for them. But up until that time, this god and that god and some other goddess seemed to be okay. Not what God had said, not what God had willed, but the way it was. So Michal took an idol and laid it on the bed where David usually slept. She put a net of goat's hair on its head and covered it with the clothes. This is sort of the way you've seen prisoners plan escapes out of prison. You make something out of paper mache and you collect hair from your own around your ears and stuff and make it look like a person under the cover. That's what she did. So when Saul sent messengers to take David, she said, this is Saul's own daughter, David's wife, "He's sick." Then Saul sent the messengers to see David for themselves. Don't just take what Michal says. Look and see if he's sick. Saul said, "Bring him up to me in the bed that I may kill him. If he's sick, pick up the whole bed and bring it." When the messengers came in, the idol was in the bed with the covering of goat's hair on its head. And Saul said to Michal, "Why have you deceived me like this and let my enemy go so that he has escaped?" And Michal answered Saul, her own father, "He said to me, 'Let me go.' Why should I kill you?" Now, that's not the whole truth, of course. I let him go because he threatened to kill me. So that didn't help. Chapter 20. So David fled from Naioth in Ramah. He came before Jonathan and said, "What have I done? What is my guilt? What is my sin against your father that he's trying to take my life?" And he said to him, "Far from it. You shall not die. My father does nothing, either great or small, without disclosing it to me. And why should my father hide this from me? Never. He's promised me he wouldn't. Swore." But David also swore, "Your father knows well that you like me, and he thinks, 'Do not let Jonathan know this, or he will be grieved.' He's not telling you, Jonathan, because he knows you like me. But truly, as Yahweh lives and as you yourself live, there is but a step between me and death. Then Jonathan said to David, whatever you say, I will do for you. David said to Jonathan, tomorrow is the new moon, and I shall not fail to sit with the king at the meal. I should not fail, but let me go so that I may hide in the field until the third evening. If your father misses me at all, this is a big feast day, say, David earnestly asked leave of me to run to Bethlehem, his city, for there is a yearly sacrifice there for all the family. He wants to be with his family at this special feast time. If he says good, then it will be well with your servant. But if he's angry, then know that evil has been determined by him. Therefore deal kindly with your servant, for you've brought your servant into a sacred covenant with you. But if there is guilt in me, kill me yourself. Why should you bring me to your father? Just go ahead and do it, Jonathan. Jonathan said, far be it from you. If I knew that it was decided by my father that evil should come upon you, would I not tell you? Then David said to Jonathan, who will tell me if your father answers you harshly? How will I know how he responds when I'm not at my proper place at the banquet? And Jonathan replied to David, come, let's go out into the field. So they both went out into the field. Jonathan said to David, by Yahweh, Elohim of Israel. So he's swearing now. When I have sounded out my father about this time tomorrow, or on the third day, if he is well disposed toward David, shall I not then send and disclose it to you? But if my father intends to do you harm, Yahweh do so to me, to Jonathan. And more also, if I do not disclose it to you and send you away so that you may go in safety. Skip to verse 18. Jonathan said to him, tomorrow is the new moon. You will be missed because your place will be empty. On the day after tomorrow, you shall go a long way down. Go to the place where you hid yourself earlier and remain beside the stone there. I will shoot 3 arrows to the side of it as though I shot at a mark, as if I'm doing target practice or something. Then I will send the boy, an attendant, saying, go find the arrows. If I say to the boy, look, the arrows are on this side of you, collect them, then you are to come. For as the Lord lives, it's safe for you and there's no danger. But if I say to the boy, look, the arrows are beyond you, then go, for Yahweh has sent you away. As for the matter about which you and I have spoken, Yahweh is witness between you and me forever. No way am I killing you, David. So David hid himself in the field. When the new moon came, the king sat at the feast to eat. All right, skip to verse 27, about midway. Saul said to his son Jonathan, why has the son of Jesse, and notice he doesn't even call him by name, why has the son of Jesse not come to the feast, either yesterday or today? And Jonathan answered Saul, David earnestly asked leave of me to go to Bethlehem. He said, let me go, for our family is holding a sacrifice in the city, and my brother has commanded me to be there. David, remember, was youngest of the lot, so an older brother supposedly could tell him what he is supposed to do. So now if I have found favor in your sight, David supposedly saying this to Jonathan, let me get away and see my brothers. For this reason he has not come to the king's table. Then Saul's anger was kindled against Jonathan, his own son. He said to him, you son of a perverse, rebellious woman. I see your mother in you, is what he's saying. I see your mother in you. You're not my son. You are your mother's son. Do I not know that you have chosen the son of Jesse to your own shame and to the shame of your mother's nakedness? That she conceived you, and you've now given in to the enemies, so to speak. For as long as the son of Jesse, doesn't call him by name again, the son of Jesse lives upon the earth, neither you nor your kingdom shall be established. Don't you understand, Jonathan? You got a shot at being king. Unless you let this guy become king, then you never have a shot at being king. Now send and bring him to me, for he shall surely die. Then Jonathan answered his father Saul, why should he be put to death? What has he done? But Saul threw his spear at Jonathan this time to strike him. So Jonathan knew that it was the decision of his father to put David to death. Jonathan rose from the table in fierce anger and ate no food on the second day of the month, for he was grieved for David, and because his father had disgraced him in front of others at the table. I mean, when he screams at him about his mother and his mother's nakedness and throws a spear at him, you would figure that would disgrace him, wouldn't you? In the morning, Jonathan went out into the field to the appointment with David, and with him was a little boy. He said to the boy, this is Jonathan, said to the boy, "Run and find the arrows that I shoot." As the boy ran, he shot an arrow beyond him. Remember, if the arrow goes farther, David, that means for you to get away. When the boy came to the place where Jonathan's arrow had fallen, Jonathan called after the boy and said, "Is the arrow not beyond you?" Those were the key words for David to run. Jonathan then called after the boy, "Hurry, be quick, do not linger." So Jonathan's boy gathered up the arrows and came to his master. But the boy knew nothing. He didn't know this code language that Jonathan was shouting out to David, who was in hiding. Only Jonathan and David knew the arrangement. Jonathan gave his weapons to the boy and said to him, "Go and carry them into the city." As soon as the boy had gone, David rose from beside the stone heap and prostrated himself with his face to the ground. He bowed 3 times. They kissed each other, wept with each other. David wept the more. Even more than Jonathan, David wept the more. Then Jonathan said to David, "Go in shalom, since both of us have sworn in the name of Yahweh, saying, 'Yahweh shall be between me and you, and between my descendants and your descendants forever.'" He got up and left, and Jonathan went into the city. Okay? Everybody happy? Let's go to chapter 22. I'm going to skip around a little more now. We don't need all the details. I'm just trying to help you understand how this all came about. So David left there and escaped to the cave of Adullam. When his brothers and all his father's house heard of it, they went down there to him. Everyone who was in distress, everyone who was in debt, everyone who was discontented gathered to him, and he became captain over them. Those who were with him numbered about 400. Now I singled out these few verses because I want you now to remember weeks from now what's happening. David has had to flee from Saul. But people who feel they do not have the ear of the king. Remember, debt in the Bible is not about credit cards or some such stuff. It's about losing your farm. And if you lose your farm, you're absolutely destitute. As long as you've got a piece of land, you can dig in it, you can plant in it, you can harvest from it. When you lose your farm, you are dependent upon somebody else. Maybe they hire you, maybe they don't. And most commitments to poor people were not, "Come and work for me 40 years. Work for me today. We'll see about tomorrow. Scholars believe that Joseph and Mary had lost their land. Joseph would not have been working, probably in Sepphoris, as the Bible says, carpenter. There are not many trees. Probably more likely a dresser of stones, a mason of some sort. Might have worked with wood. They did have framings around doors and windows and so on. Perhaps. But, nonetheless, dependent upon somebody else to hire him. And if he didn't get hired one day, there was no food that evening. And that's how destitute people could be. So here's David. He's fleeing from Saul, but the common people are beginning to hear where he is and what Saul's intent is. So they come to David with any problem they have. He becomes a godfather to them, if you would. A godfather to them. And of course, once he helps them with their problems of debt and so on, they will fight for him to the death. Guess who will do that later? David's son, Absalom. David gets to be too important. flitting around with all these different women, ending up, with having to have one kill because he's impregnated his wife and so on. It was a miserable mess. And Absalom is grieving and grieving because one of his half-brothers has raped his full sister, and David's done nothing about it. So he waits every day by the gate of the city. When you get to Jerusalem, you will be told this is the Damascus gate, this is the Caesarea gate, and so on. The gates, we would say the gate to Sand Springs, the gate to Sapulpa, the gate to Muskogee or Bartlesville, if we had a wall city here. Okay, so Absalom sits by the gate, and as people are coming into the city to have grievances addressed, he says, "My father doesn't have time for you, but I do. My father doesn't have time for you, but I do." And there comes a time when they will fight to the death for Absalom, and they throw David out of the palace. Well, that's another whole thing. Right now, it's David who's currying favor with the people because they come to him to address their grievances and not to Saul. Okay, just those few verses. Skip to chapter 24. When Saul returned from following the Philistines, he's trying to chase them back into their area, he was told, "David is in the wilderness of En-Gedi." All right, I want to mention this because if you're going to Israel in February, you're going to go to En-Gedi. Let's orient ourselves. Mediterranean Sea, the Dead Sea, the lake called the Sea of Galilee, the Jordan River. Right here on the Dead Sea, about where the Nine would be if this were a clock face, is En-Gedi. I suspect, it's been our experience the other times, we will have lunch at En-Gedi. And just a little way up the road is Masada. Now, Masada was not there in the time we're reading. Masada was a fortress created by Herod the Great in Jesus' time. Remember, okay, it's a sheer stone face. You get there now by cable car, or you can walk if you choose. Our Jason actually ran up these many steps when he was running cross country for SMU. Masada is right nearby. And after the Romans destroyed Jerusalem in the year 70, you remember this, the Jews were killing as many Romans as they could. Every time they got one off to himself, they stuck a knife in him. And eventually the Romans decided, enough of this. They were going to deal once and for all with Jerusalem, and they destroyed the second temple, burned the city, destroyed the gates and so on, and chased these zealots, and they ran to Masada. Up the very narrow little walkway, steps, all the way up to Masada. And it was so easy to defend that they held off the Roman soldiers for more than 3 years. Remember? And eventually the Romans tried to come up the steps, couldn't. They could pour boiling oil on them, any number of things to keep them from advancing. So eventually the Romans built a ramp. The Roman engineers built a ramp filling in with dirt and rock, all the way up to Masada. It took them more than 3 years. And when they breached the fortress the next morning, they found all the Jews on top were dead. Remember? Okay. That's where David was hiding. En-Gedi. So remember that when we get there. En-Gedi. It's where David was hiding from Saul. Right down there, and it's desert. It's real desert. Saul took 3,000 chosen men out of all Israel and went to look for David and his men in the direction of the rocks of the wild goats. Okay, we always say, who will be first as we leave Jerusalem the morning we go down to Masada to find one of the wild goats? They are very well camouflaged. You have to look very carefully. These are the little ibex. I-B-E-X, okay? The little ibex goats still live in the desert down around the Dead Sea. So here we are 3,000 years ago, and the place is known even then as the rocks of the wild goats. Okay? He came to the sheepfolds beside the road where there was a cave, and Saul went in to relieve himself. He went to the bathroom in the cave. Now David and his men were sitting in the innermost parts of the same cave. They're a little bit deeper in the cave. The men of David said to him, "Here is the day of which Yahweh said to you, I will give your enemy into your hand, and you shall do to him as it seems good to you. This is your chance. All the soldiers are outside. You got him." David went and stealthily cut off a corner of Saul's cloak, but doesn't hurt him. Afterward, David was stricken to the heart because he'd cut off a corner of Saul's cloak. He said to his men, "Yahweh forbid that I should do this thing to my Lord, Yahweh's anointed." Remember, the word anointed is Messiah. "To raise my hand against him. He is Yahweh's anointed." Samuel did anoint him. So David scolded his men severely and did not permit them to attack Saul. Saul got up and left the cave and went on his way. Now afterwards, David also rose up and went out of the cave and called after Saul. Now, you can be sure he would have let him get some distance away. And then he cries out, "My Lord, the king!" When Saul looked behind him, David bowed with his face to the ground and did obeisance. David said to Saul, "Why do you listen to the words of those who say, 'David seeks to do you harm'? This very day your eyes have seen how Yahweh gave you into my hand in the cave, and some urged me to kill you, but I spared you. I said, I will not raise my hand against my Lord, for he is Yahweh's anointed. See, my father." I mean, here, of course, he's not his flesh and blood father. But he's showing, I'm like your sons. I'm a son to you. See, my father, see the corner of your cloak in my hand? By the fact that I cut off the corner of your cloak and did not kill you, you may know for certain that there is no wrong or treason in my hands. I have not sinned against you, though you are hunting me to take my life. Skip to verse 16. When David had finished speaking these words to Saul, Saul said, "Is this your voice?" And as David has said, "My father," he says, "My son David." Saul lifted up his voice and wept. He said to David, "You are more righteous than I, for you have repaid me good where I have repaid you evil." Now here is a very important word, righteous. And we find it, of course, in the 23rd Psalm, one of many places. The Lord, which it translates, "I am who I am," is my shepherd. I shall not want. He leads me beside still waters. He leads me in paths of righteousness. And I've told you that righteousness is much easier understood, I think, if you just remember right standing. We stand right with God when we trust that God wants good to come to us. And that if bad things are happening to us, God is grieving with us. God grieves when we grieve. And God celebrates when we have something appropriate to celebrate. God wants good to come to us. And if you trust that that is so, then you stand right with God. God gives you right standing. Accept His gift. We stand right with each other when in the Hebrew Scriptures we do chesed. When we have constant, steadfast, never failing love for each other. The Greeks have a word, agape. When you will the good of the other. So Saul knows David has been more righteous than he has. David could have killed him. He didn't. Saul would have killed David on several occasions already if he'd been able to. But don't think this is a lasting repentance here. Go to verse 20. Saul is impressed that David didn't kill him. Now I know that you shall surely be king, and that the kingdom of Israel shall be established in your hand. So I want to ask a favor, Saul is saying. Swear to me, therefore, by the I am who I am, that you will not cut off all my descendants after me. Remember, if you're going, Machiavelli would write in The Prince, if you're going to take on the royal family, you better kill them. And you better kill them all. So Saul is saying, when you become king, I'm asking you, don't kill my descendants. Don't kill my children and my grandchildren. That's what he's asking him. Don't cut off my descendants after me, and that you will not wipe out my name from my father's house. So David swore this to Saul. Then Saul went home. And we will discover when Saul dies, and we will go to Bethshean in February, where Saul and his sons were nailed to the wall. Their end will come. David grieves mightily. There's only one left, a crippled son after that, and David brings him into his own household, you recall. I'll get to that later. He honors the commitment he made to Saul this day down near En-Gedi. Chapter 25. Now Samuel died. All right, so Eli died, but high priest position did not follow into his sons because they were corrupt, vile. Instead, it passed to Samuel. Now Samuel has lived his whole life. He's anointed Saul, even though he doesn't want to. Saul's turned out to be a bust. He's not a good king. So he believes God sent him to anoint David, and he's done that. And now finally Samuel dies. And all Israel assembled and mourned for him, and they buried him at his home in Ramah. Go to verse 2. The plot thickens, if you would. A woman, another woman comes into David's life. There was a man in Maon whose property was in Carmel. All right. February, we will take you to Carmel. Carmel is up the coast, okay? So we will fly into Tel Aviv, spend the first night there. We will go over to Caesarea, which wasn't there at this time, but where Pontius Pilate lived. So we will go from Tel Aviv over to Caesarea, and then we will go up the coast to Mount Carmel. Okay, right here. Remember, this isn't very far. 50 miles from the Mediterranean to the Jordan. So in that same day, after we say Caesarea, we'll go on up to Carmel. You and I know Carmel even better because it's where Elijah challenged the prophets of Baal. Who could light fire on an altar without a match? Remember? And those prophets of Baal were led by the ruling family, a hateful old queen named Jezebel, and her husband Ahab. And Elijah defeated the prophets of Baal. And what do you do when you defeat your enemies? You kill them all. He had 400 prophets up there that day, so he put his foot on their neck and he cut their heads off. 400 of them, and the blood flowed down Mount Carmel into the Jezreel River, which doesn't flow to the Mediterranean, it flows over to the Jordan. It's a very fertile valley, still is, a very fertile valley. From Mount Carmel you can see these beautiful green crops, maybe not in February, we'll say, but this beautiful fertile valley. All right, so here we've been way down here, but that's only 100 miles. It didn't happen the next day. In time, we're going to deal with a fellow up here at Carmel. Long before Jezebel and Ahab, of course. Okay. This man up at Carmel was very rich. He had 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats. He was shearing his sheep in Carmel. Now the name of the man was Nabal, and the name of his wife, Abigail. The woman was clever and beautiful. But the man was surly and mean. He was a Calebite. Caleb? We know that name. Caleb and Joshua, the two who brought the minority report to Moses. We can take this land. We can take this land. He listened to the other 10, spent 40 more years before crossing over. Descendants, way down the road now of Caleb. Okay. David heard in the wilderness that Nabal was shearing his sheep. So David sent 10 young men. David said to the young men, go up to Carmel, go to Nabal, greet him in my name. Then you shall salute him, saying, Shalom, peace be to you, shalom to your house, shalom to all that you have. I hear that you have shearers. Now your shepherds have been with us, and we did them no harm, and they missed nothing. We've taken nothing from them is the point. All the time they were in Carmel. Ask your young men, they will tell you. Therefore let my young men find favor in your sight, for we have come on a feast day. Please give whatever you have at hand to your servants and to your son David. We're hungry. We mean you no harm. And remember, we've already heard that people have been coming to David, and he's been addressing their grievances, been trying to help solve their problems. So there are a lot of people who are willing to die for David. And David says, we're hungry. And you got a lot of sheep and goats. How about something to eat? Verse 10, Nabal answered David's servants, who is David? And who is the son of Jesse? Not smart. Not smart. Verse 11, shall I take my bread and my water and the meat that I've butchered for my shearers and give it to men who come from I do not know where? So David's young men turned away and came back and told him all this. And David said to his men, every man strap on his sword. Verse 14. One of the young men told Abigail, Nabal's wife, David sent messengers out of the wilderness, remember wilderness is desert, to salute our master, and he shouted insults at them. These young men offered shalom. Nabal screams, rants, raves at them. Yet the men were very good to us, and we suffered no harm. We never missed anything when we were in the fields as long as we were with them. These were nice people. Verse 18. So Abigail is beautiful and she's smart. So Abigail hurried and took 200 loaves, 2 skins of wine, 5 sheep ready dressed, 5 measures of parched grain, 100 clusters of raisins, 200 cakes of figs. She loaded them on donkeys and said to her young men, go on ahead of me, I'm coming after you. I can't go as fast as you can. Hurry! Go out to meet David. But I'm right behind you with all these gifts. But she did not tell her husband, Nabal. As she rode on the donkey and came down under cover of the mountain, David and his men came down toward her, and she met them. Now David had said, surely it was in vain that I protected all that this fellow has in the desert, so that nothing was missed of all that belonged to him. In other words, David is the godfather, and this man is not showing him proper respect. David has been his protector of his men and his animals, and he's not willing to share. That's the argument here. Nothing was missed of all that belonged to him, but he has returned me evil for good, what Saul had done, you see. So Elohim do so to David, and more also, if by morning I leave so much as one male of all who belong to him. I'm going to kill them all. When Abigail saw David, she hurried and alighted from the donkey, fell before David on her face, bowing to the ground. She fell at his feet and said, upon me alone, my Lord, be the guilt. Please let your servant speak in your ears and hear the words of your servant. My Lord, do not take seriously this ill-natured fellow Nabal. I sleep with him. I know him well. He's no good. Verse 27. Now let this present that your servant has brought to my Lord be given to the young men who follow my Lord. Please forgive the trespass of your servant, for Yahweh will certainly make my Lord a sure house, because my Lord is fighting the battles of Yahweh. I know who you are. You deserved respect. You deserved to have your men fed. Please. I'm sorry. I've brought all this food. Verse 32. David said to Abigail, "Blessed be Yahweh, Elohim of Israel, who sent you to meet me today. Blessed be your good sense, and blessed be you, who have kept me today from blood guilt and from avenging myself by my own hand. For as surely as Yahweh, Elohim of Israel, lives, who has restrained me from hurting you, unless you had hurried and come to meet me, truly by morning they would not have been left to Nabal so much as one male." Abigail, I was going to kill them all. Then David received from her hand what she had brought him. He said to her, "Go up to your house in Shalom." Everything's okay, Abigail. So verse 36, Abigail came to Nabal. He was holding a feast in his house, like the feast of a king. I mean, the man was rich. He had plenty. Nabal's heart was merry within him, for he was very drunk. So she told him nothing at all until the morning light. In the morning, when the wine had gone out of Nabal, he'd sobered up. His wife told him these things, and his heart died within him. Oh boy. As Bishop Hart would have said, we stepped over a snake that time. We stepped over. That's who David is. That's what he could have done to us. That's what he would have done to us. His heart died within him. Remember how I've told you how important the word heart is? When you're disheartened, when you're discouraged, the French word courage, heart discouraged, or when your heart's gone from you. His heart died within him. He became like a stone. I mean, he really sobered up. This could have been disastrous. And about 10 days later, Yahweh struck Nabal, and he died. When David heard that Nabal was dead, he said, let's skip down to the latter part of verse 39, David sent and wooed Abigail to make her his wife. I mean, what does every man need? Somebody who's beautiful and smart. Beautiful and smart. He sent to woo her and make her his wife. Verse 42. So Abigail got up hurriedly and rode away on a donkey. Her 5 maids attended her. She went after the messengers of David and became his wife. And you're saying, he's already got a wife. Saul's daughter, Michal, is his wife. Correct. David also married Ahinoam of Jezreel. What did I tell you lies just at the foot of Mount Carmel, the Jezreel River, and beautiful farming country, irrigated by the river. So he married another woman from this very fertile river valley, and both of them, Abigail and Ahinoam, became his wives. For Saul had given his daughter Michal, David's wife, to Paltai, son of Laish, who was from Galim. Saul is not a nice person. He's not a nice person. And so he promises David one of his daughters and then gives her to somebody else. He actually gives Michal to David and now says, no, Michal, you're not going to be married to him any longer. He's the enemy. You're going to marry this fellow over here, Paltai. We'll hear that name again later. All right. You have any questions so far? Everybody's happy. All right. I'm going to put a mark right there, chapter 26. We're reading more than some of you might have thought we would, but I do want to get the most important things, but not everything we did before. So I'm doing my best to do that for you. We'll start at chapter 26. Next Sunday is 4th of July. July revival meeting time starts. Let me tell you, Ann White, Sherry had her picture in our church paper this week, Ann tabulated every ballot from both Sundays that you got to vote. And guess what? There were a few changes, not many. Every ballot you had taken in the last 30 years of songs you like to sing in July Number 1 and 2 had been either Old Rugged Cross or Amazing Grace. They flip-flopped from time to time, but they stayed 1 and 2, 1 and 2. This time they were 2 and 3. Another one jumped up. How Great Thou Art became number 1 this time. How Great Thou Art became the number 1 hymn that more people like to sing in July than any other. We have learned that we can do 8 hymns and still have time for taking up the money and preaching. We can do 8 hymns, and so that means we can do 32. This year we have just 4 Sundays in July. 32 hymns. 27 of them were the same as the last ballot. 5 different. From number 27 through 32, 5 different ones. And Ann and I have put those into the services for July. We'll sing what you say you like to sing, all right? If you haven't been to church, don't rush off.